Wow. 5 years in prison. That's a lot. And she looks very young as well. I mean, this is definitely going to mess up her future. And it's for criticizing her country's armed forces. Now, there's a lot of people in the West that are like, oh my God, Russia. How could they have done this? And I assume when you say something like this, you're referring to like, well, this would never happen here. Like, we are much more civilized. We are much more enlightened. Like, this would never happen here because we got freedom and liberty. And the answer to that is like, I don't know, like, depends where here is. Because there are a certain number of crimes that you can do in Germany or in the United Kingdom. Not criticizing the Germany or the British military. They don't care about that. But if you criticize the policies of politicians, then they may care. Especially if it's got to do with what they consider the speech of hate. You know, like, you can say something online, and it can get you arrested. Again, in Western countries. There was actually this interview which compared the number of people arrested in Britain for shit they said on social media versus the number of people for shit they said in Russia. So, I don't know what this lady have said, but the question is, why her, right? Like, I'm sure other people from Russia may go on social media and they may say stuff against their military. Why don't they get persecuted? And the answer is, like, many of these cases, especially when it's about hate speech laws and stuff, it's also about how popular you are as a person. So if you're a literal nobody and you go around and you break these types of speech laws or obscenity laws or misinformation or, you know, like, they usually go into the same pot that falls under suppression and censorship. If you break them, well, it matters who you are. If you're a nobody, if you're just like a random account, usually they don't care. Unless you say something that goes viral, right? Like, unless you're like a Count Dankula and you make the Nazi pug joke. And when you make that joke, you have no idea, like, how many people will share it. And you're like, well, probably a couple of people will share it. But if it ends up shared by millions and you have no control over that and it goes viral, well, all of a sudden, the Scottish Crown, they want to persecute you. So that's what matters. Like, if she said something which went viral, that accounts for it. Then it's like the number of subscribers you have. If you're popular, and by popular I mean you got more than, I don't know, like 200,000, it's already big. Even 100,000, like, for Russia is really big. If you have that, then you're under a magnifying glass. Like, stuff that you normally could have said when you were smaller, now is going to get you in trouble. So it's also that people will look back at stuff you said when you were smaller, and they're going to bring them up, especially if you manage to grow even bigger, right? So, like, if you have millions of followers, then definitely people are going to go back in time, and they're going to watch your videos, and they're going to take everything out of context. Because the bigger you grow, the more likely you are to encounter haters. And there are people online that, you know, they like to pearl clutch at everything, as long as the person they dislike gets punished in some way or another. And this is what's happening. It's why it's her, and not what other people were asking me. It's like, hey, V, I got Russian friends, and they talk against the war effort all the time. Like, well, why don't they get punished? Well, it's because they're not big enough. You notice this happening with other countries, like China, for instance. Pornography is illegal in China, under all forms, right? So we're talking vanilla, we're talking hentai, like anything that is pornographic in China, it is punishable. But Chinese people, they share it all the time, until you're a famous artist that has a significant following, and you doodle those cartoons, and then, you know, you get convicted. So it's how this functions. It's basically how big you are, and then they apply the legislation, which actually exists, right? Like, she was aware that she's not allowed to do it. Sometimes you're aware, sometimes you're not. The thing is, like, I still, as despicable as the system is, and as horrible as the system is, at least it allows you to defend yourself in some form. Like, you still go to a court, you still get presented the evidence of the stuff you said, you still can get a lawyer that tries to defend you, even if the system is unjust, okay? Like, take into account that this is what's happening, and you get a punishment for 5 years, right? Like, it's a finite punishment. After you finish those 5 years, you go back into society, you're a reintegrated person, you can go back having a Twitch account. Now, let's compare this with what happened in Australia recently. It came up on my screen as I opened Twitter that this guy allegedly was a white nationalist. I think he looked 20, maybe 22, young lad. He got debanked. So in a country like Australia, where they're constantly pushing for a cashless society, they're constantly pushing for CBDC, they're constantly pushing for all transactions to happen with banks, banks are also allowed to debank people. So this happens outside of the judicial process. This means that if you have opinions that, I guess, the banks, right? It's definitely not the government. The government loves those opinions. The government loves having people talk about whatever they want. It's just that the banks don't, right? So the banks can just say, yeah, we're not going to do business with you anymore. And they're going to debank you. Now, you don't get a lawyer. You don't get to argue your case. You don't get a sentence for like 5 years you're not allowed to have a bank account. No. It's like you're debanked. That's it. It's for life. And there's no due process. There's nothing that you can do. Now, what does it mean in a society where the movement is towards having all transactions go electronically? What does it mean if you can't have a bank account? Like, we saw this with Nigel Farage in the UK as well. It's like, it's not just one bank debanking you. It's usually all of them. Like, they share these blacklists. So, like, what happens then? How do you get a job? You know, like, you get a job and they will say, well, give us your bank account so we can wire you the money. Like, if you find employment, they're not going to be like, oh, you know, I want to be paid in crypto. It's like, fuck off. We're not going to accommodate that. Like, get someone else that's reasonable. That's what the employer is going to say. They're not going to give a shit. Right? So, again, like, maybe you argue with the fact that, yeah, like, white nationalism needs to be cracked down, but, like, shouldn't the punishment be finite? Shouldn't the person be able to defend themselves? Shouldn't the person be able to have a lawyer and be presented the evidence? Shouldn't they be judged by a jury of their own peers? And the answer seems to be no, right? So, like, when I look at this system, where this lady got punished in Russia, I say it's horrible, but I find it sad that I can't say that the West is better. And in 2014, unironically, I could say, yeah, the West is far better. Like, the West is a model for the rest of the world. But now, in 2024, I can't say that anymore. Especially not on the trajectory that things are going, because things are going more towards the extreme, rather than to loosen up some of the restrictions. And the worst part is that the transgressors don't get their time in court, don't get to be judged by a jury of their own peers, but they get to be judged by for-profit corporations where it's one strike and you're out. So, is this system a lot better than what we're seeing with the Russians? I mean, you don't go to prison. That's one thing, right? So, like, that works in favor of our system. There's no jail time. Depending on where you're at. Because in some countries, you do get jail time. But assuming you don't, right? Imagine living life as a 20-year-old being debanked. How do you do that? Let me know what you guys think, though. And as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.